welcome to yet another video. So today we're having a little look at the NVE 1.3, which is effectively a gun that's styled on the DV1. They're not the same, but they are styled on the DV1. And we've got the GTI Pro Lite, again styled on the Devilbiss GTI Pro Lite, but they're not the same. They pretend to be, but they're not the same at all. So a bit of background to this video. The idea of this one was I'd done a back-to-back of the GTI Pro Lite against the real thing, the real Devilbiss GTI Pro Lite, and I did a back-to-back of the NVE, the Chinese NVE, against the Devilbiss DV1. So I'll put a link in the description if you want to see how they fared against the real guns. But the reason for doing this video at the time was that in my mind these two are starting to compete a bit with each other monetarily wise, because the GTI Pro Lite is around about 55 US dollars, and I'll speak in US dollars because although I'm based in the UK, so we use the pound, I actually normally on AliExpress I pay in US dollars, so I do buy it in US dollars, so I may as well say what I paid for it in US dollars. So they're about 55 US dollars. And the NVE now is about 70 US dollars, something like that. So there's only $15 between the two, which is not a lot of money. What's that, about 11 GB pounds, something like that? 12 euros, 12.5 euros, so not a lot of money. So in my mind, these two are actually knocking on each other's door. So I thought it'd be a good idea to put the two together while I was in the process of using both of these. And we'd established, you know, what they were like compared to the original. Again, look in the description, you'll see a link if you're bothered by, you know, what they were like against the original. But yeah, I thought I'd compare the two together. Now, there's quite a few cheap Chinese guns about anyway, so there's a good range. So whether there's still like a huge range for something that looks like a more expensive gun, I'm not too sure really, because certainly things like the R500 Aero Pro, as I've got, or Rongpeng actually make them, can be knocking on the door of guns like this. But I genuinely think that the NVE, which is the gun we're using now, is a better gun than the R500. The main drawback with it, and it's not a huge drawback, not as much as, in fact that would be a good idea for a video actually. We'll see what these Chinese guns, that some of the cheaper Chinese guns can do air consumption wise against each other. Because the reason for saying that, and a roundabout reason for saying that, is the NVE, this NVE, I reckon probably uses about 11 CFM, which is a little bit less than the original Devilbiss. And if you look at various stats and figures, that's probably about 3.5, maybe 3 CFM more than something like the R500. But because you need to use the R500 at 2.5 bar to get as a result anywhere near the NVE, they're actually about the same. They're going to be about the same. So what I'm saying about this gun is just irrelevant if you're worried about air consumption. So this gun is actually, in my opinion, probably the best of the cheaper Chinese guns. The only one that will give it a real run for its money is the 4000, the NTools 4000B, which I will do a video on, but we'll have to, I'll put a link in the description. I have done a separate test on that. But we'll have to see the air consumption, because the NTools does use the NTools 4000B does use quite a bit of air, probably a bit more air than this. And as I say, this thing would be knocking on its door, if not level with it, as far as spray and clear coat and the base coat goes. This is actually a really good base coat gun as well, because it's got a bigger fan. And I'm not always a fan of bigger fans. Yeah, there's a pun for you. I'm not always a fan of having a big fan on a spray gun, because it depends what you're spraying. Normally for clear coat I find a smaller pattern better, and you want to keep the output as well, so it's no good turning the fan in, because you tend to get I don't think it atomizes as fine if you turn a gun in, turn the fan in on a gun. I don't think it atomizes as fine as if you have it fully open and let the gun do the work, so to speak. A lot of people say, well, quite a few people say that as well. So I tend to use them fully open all the time, but this gun fully open actually worked supremely well for a $70 gun at reasonable air consumption. Now, the GTI Pro Lite, the GTI Pro Lite copy is in comparison a bit heavier, although they're both heavy. Both of these guns are heavy for a compared to the original, certainly anyway. But the GTI Pro Lite is quite a different animal, and as I say, I'll put a link in the description, and you'll see how it compares against the genuine gun. But this has, as you'll see in a second, it has a very quite a small pattern, and normally I like that smaller, wetter pattern for clear coat because it wets the panel up quicker. And it does depend on what clear coat you're using. The better the clear coat, the bigger the pattern. You're rewarded better with a bigger pattern normally. But if you're using a cheaper clear coat, normally it's good to get it on there because there's not loads of flow out. So a smaller, wetter pattern actually works quite well. But with this one, it's just too fierce. I use this at 2 3/4 out on the fluid. So you turn it all the way in, back it off 2 3/4. Pull the trigger, and that's the amount of fluid I'm using when I'm doing this. But it actually goes to about 5 out, 5.5 out even. So you're still, when you're turning it back, the needle is still coming back up to 5.5 turns out. And when you get it back to 5.5 turns out, so you've got the fluid on full, it's an absolute fountain. And it's too much really. I mean, I like a fast gun, but it just seems to overwhelm the cap. It just doesn't deal with it at all. So I found it best to use it at a lower output and just take it a bit more easy. You still get obviously the size of pattern, it's just not so wet, and you won't run into so much trouble. But certainly the NVE is the far more forgiving gun of these two. It's certainly when you use these guns and you use them against the real deal, you do notice quite a difference between the real thing and the fake thing, as you probably would expect. Normally the fake one is less in every respect, but with the NVE the difference isn't so big. So if you're looking at like a $15 difference in price tag, I would go with the NVE for sure, because it actually uses less air than the Pro Lite. The two of these at 2 bar use about the same sort of air. Maybe the Pro Lite will use a little bit more, but I use the Pro Lite about 2.4 bar because you need that pressure to get the atomization. Otherwise it becomes very peely. You know, if you've got it on full fluid, there's just not enough air going through that cap to deal with all the fluid, and even if you back the fluid off, it still doesn't deal with it properly. So I found about 2.4 bar, which is about 35 psi on the Pro Lite, works much better and gives better atomization. But what it does mean is it actually uses more air than the NVE. So you know, you don't get anything for nothing. So when you're using these guns, people say about LVLP a lot, and you will find that there's not really an LVLP gun. Manufacturers love to label them LVLP, but they're not really. They are compared to the old pressure-fed guns and like the HVLP guns, but most of them, like a GTI Pro Lite with a TE10 cap, a Transtech cap as they call it, uses about 10 CFM, and that's at 2 bar. And that's the same as an R500 will use at 2.5 bar, which is where you need to use it. So, you know, there's not really LVLP, not in my opinion anyway, but people call them it, and people often look for LVLP. But yeah, certainly of these two, the NVE is the gun to go for. Even though it is a little bit more expensive, and I would rank it, as I say, again up against the A610, the YT160, the R500. I would rank it better than those. And again, compared to those, it's probably only about $25 US more now, so it's not a huge difference. But as you can see, there's little difference between the two, only that the NVE actually, it was far more comfortable to use, far more rewarding for the painter, and a lot easier as well. So if you're, you know, getting one of these guns and you're not used to painting, the NVE is certainly easier to use. But the Pro Lite was on the right, on the left, and the NVE was on the right. Anyway, guys, hope you enjoyed the video as always, and you keep watching them, and I'll keep making them. Cheers, guys. Thanks as always. Thank you. Bye bye.